We're looking at the Art of the Ancient Near East 2, the second half. The reason I broke the lectures up this way is now we're going to be looking at the architecture of domination. So we saw the Neolithic roots. We saw early architecture before the city-states. We talked about the Fertile Crescent, the fact that they are needing to start creating some defense. We see the richness of Ur. So all the seeds are laid for a struggle for power. After 3000, Sumer gets divided into Uruk, Akkad, and Ur. We talked about this. So the Acadians are ruling between 2332 and 2279. And don't forget, we're thinking backwards. So 2332 is a bigger number. The bigger the number, the longer ago it was. So Babylonian Persia start in 612 to 331. So we've got about almost 2,000 years between of Akkad, the Acadians, before we get Babylonian Persia. Then it gets much shorter. Lots of these cultures are making architecture that forms an architecture of domination. So the Acadians settled to the north of Uruk. They adopted a Sumerian culture, but they spoke a Semitic language, which is interesting. And the Semitic language is from farther west. So they were conquerors. They conquered the Sumerian cities. They conquered most of Mesopotamia during the reign of their king Sargon I. And so for the first time, these city-states become subject to a larger political empire. And some of the Akkadian gods, they brought their gods with them, and the Akkadian rulers are given godlike status. So this is a first too, is that we have this beginning of this divine right to rule. So Sargon I established himself as the sole ruler of Sumer. So he's powerful over the other city-states. And he extended his power all the way beyond the Euphrates, all the way to the Mediterranean. And interestingly enough, there's a legend that he was placed in a reed basket, sent down the Euphrates, rescued by a gardener, and won the love of Ishtar, who is also Inanna. So these two names become interchangeable. So he had a long rule. He ruled for over half a century. This portrait of him was made from the lost wax method. So we've suddenly jumped to this advanced Bronze Age culture in which they make a wax mold and they create this image out of wax and pour bronze into it. So bronze casting is clearly highly developed by this time. And part of the reason that we don't find that many bronze images is, of course, if you conquer and you get the bronze, you might melt it down for weapons. This is the stele of Naram Sin. So this is another example of this art of dominance. A stele is a stone slab, and it's a very common art form at this time. They put them vertically. They might place it in the town square or in front of an important building, something like that. It commemorates the military victory of Naram Sin over the Satuni of the Lulubi tribe. So you can see Naram Sin way up here at the top. He's almost as big as the mountain next to him. And there's no background behind him, so he's standing out. And at the top, there used to be more stars. There were probably 7 stars to show the 7 main gods that we saw listed earlier. And you can see the people that he defeated underneath him. He's stepping on them. This is an example of Machtkunst, which is a German word for power art. So we can see that Naram Sin has the horned cap of divinity and a long beard, which is a sign of virility. And then there's 2 defeated enemies in front of him. One's praying for mercy and the other's pulling out a spear. So going up signifies success. And falling down signifies failure, of course. So the other thing is that the ruler's right side had to be intact and well-formed for the ruler to prosper, which I think is interesting. Why the right side? Anyway, they dominated the world for another 50 years or so. I'm just giving you this ziggurat again to remind you that these ziggurats are used throughout the rule of the Acadians as well, although it was built much earlier. In 2180, the Akkadian Empire is attacked by the Guti. So we're going to see lots of attacks and different empires coming up. Lagash remained independent. So they had a strong ruler named Gudea, who he's a different animal than Sargon I, and he represented himself as the embodiment of just rule. So he had votive figures created of himself, but they're a little bit different. He's the governor of Lagash, and we have 20 votive statues of him. They're all dedicated to different gods, and they're meant as specific portraits of him, of a ruler, a certain social class that he could actually make this portrait resemble him, use stone to create permanence, and show just the extent of what a wonderful ruler he is and how worshipful he is by different images of himself worshiping different gods. It's made out of diorite. He's always shown bald or in a round cap, and there's always inscriptions on his garments. I have a couple of other ones to show you. Here's two different seated Gudea figures with different inscriptions on their laps. They look almost exactly the same, but you can just see the difference, just a little bit different stone, different inscriptions. The hands are differently made, the cap. Here's a head of Gudea. And this particular one has a temple plan on the road. So in this particular one, he's an architectural patron. Okay, so the Akkadian dynasty collapsed when the area was overrun. So you're going to keep seeing this. We're overrunning, then we get powerful, then we get overrun again. So Ur-Nammu of Ur becomes the king of Sumer and Akkad in 2112. Ur becomes the capital, and it's the center of the worship of the moon god Nana. And Onna was the daughter of Sargon I. She was a princess, she was a priestess, she was a poet, she was a prophet, she wrote an epic poem, and she began the tradition of princesses, serving as high priestesses. The Babylonians, their ruler is Hammurabi. The Assyrian rulers are Thermos Urple and Sargon II. Then the Neo-Babylonians, their ruler is Nebuchadnezzar II, and then we have the Persians. So they are the cultures and rulers that come after. So we have 300 years of turmoil in Mesopotamia, people jockeying for position. So the Amorites reunited Sumer under Hammurabi, and their capital city is Babylon. Their subjects are Babylonians. And they have the first written legal code that listed the laws of the realm. And we have an importance of a palace architecture now. So Hammurabi ended the independent states of ruler. And so Babylon becomes the political and culture and religious center of Mesopotamia. And so Hammurabi wrote the Code of Hammurabi, and some of you may have even heard of this. Hammurabi is the famous statement, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is the stele of Hammurabi. So in this image, it's a little hard to see, but Hammurabi is standing up. And then Shamash is the Akkadian sun god, and Shamash is sitting down. And remember that horned cap of divinity you saw on Naram Sin? Well, Shamash is wearing it, and he's wearing an ankle-length robe. He's holding the rod of divine power and justice in front of Hammurabi. So again, this is a better picture. This is hieratic scale that we know that Shamash, when he stands up, he'll be much, much taller than Hammurabi. Think about this for a minute. We have laws in our country. Every civilization has laws, right? You ever think about where they're written down? Like, where do we keep them? If you wanted to look up a law right now, what would you do? You'd go online, right? You go to Wikipedia or something or some website. What about before computers? Where did we look for those written laws? Where do laws come from anyway? Governments create laws depending on the government, or if you have a king or an emperor, he writes his own law and he decides what's going to happen. But there was a time when there wasn't any written law at all. First of all, to even write laws down, you have to have writing. So Hammurabi is very, very important because this is our first official document. This is like a document that would be in the Library of Congress. This is like the Declaration of Independence. It has that official stamp on it. And this entire stele has all of this recording of all these laws. So probably the most important thing to take away from Hammurabi is the idea of a codified law and what that means in the advancement of civilization. This image is an image from Mari, which is north of Babylon. It's the capital city of Zim Rollin. And the main reason I put it in here for you is because I wanted you to have an image of some murals and what the paintings at the time looked like. So there were many, many murals in the palace of Zim Rollin. And Zim Rollin was sometimes an enemy of Hammurabi, and sometimes he wasn't. So this is made out of a mud plaster. It was created around 1750 BCE. So after this very short reign of the Babylonians, we start having power struggles between Sumer, Akkad, Lagash, and Mari, and the invaders from north can take over. The Assyrians take over. So again, united we stand, divided we fall. And the Assyrians control almost all of Mesopotamia by the end of the 9th century, and by the end of the 7th century, they extend their reign all the way to Egypt. So their main god is Ashur, who is, of course, the god of war. And their leaders include the god's name as part of their names. Thus, we have Ashurnabirtapal and Ashurnasirpal, as they are god leaders. They kept very, very detailed records of their kings. So we're just looking at 2 of them. But the king is the focus of the art of this culture. And there are religious subjects. So this is a Lamaze figure. It's a new motif, and it comes with the Assyrians. It's a protective figure. It's meant to preside over ritual scenes. It's meant to protect, and they're fixed in a very, very formal attitude. There are not as many of these figures now as there were 10 years ago because ISIS has destroyed quite a few of these Lamaze figures. We can look at them in the front and in the profile. I have a couple of different pictures of them. And if you notice, this figure is showing 5 legs. Now, he doesn't really have 5 legs. The 5th leg is there to show him walking. It's a human-headed winged lion. This particular one is from the palace of Ashurnasirpal III in Nimrod, and it was created around 883 to 859 BC. He was about 10 feet. I can't tell you which of these figures were destroyed and which were not, but they all look very similar. It's a guardian protector of the palace in the throne room. Nimrod was an Assyrian city-state of the 9th century. So, again, a natural development from village culture. So you could think of this as ceremonial urbanism, if you will, that this Lamaze figure, this human-headed winged lion, is a representation of the power of all the Assyrian armies. So sometimes they'd have the head of a man or the head of a bull, the body of a lion or a bull, the wings of an eagle, but they always had the horned headdress of the god. So if you notice these details, it's boundless wealth. So wealth equals power, because with wealth you can buy armies. This particular one is from the gateway of Sargon II's palace at Dur Sharakin. It's now in Khorsabad, Iraq, if it's still there. And it was limestone. It was 14 feet high. So they rose to dominance in the north by 1400, and their empire collapsed by 600. So their empire lasted around 800 years or so. Here's an image of Thermos Urple II. So here, this is, if you think of the Gudea figures, peaceful, worshipful, showing the worship of various gods, showing his kingliness by his worship. Here, Thermos Urple is showing godlike power. So it's a very different interpretation. And the Assyrians gain international status. They go all the way to Egypt, they push east, they push north. They lived in palace complexes. So most of the artwork that we have from the Assyrians is art about the king. This is really typical of artwork from this period. This is an image of Thermos Urple, who we just saw a statue of, hunting lions. But notice how beautifully these lions are carved. You can see here in this lioness where the arrows are in her, they've shot her right at the connection where the rear legs attach to the hip. You know, she has to drag her hindquarters so that she can't keep moving. How many arrows it takes to defeat these lions. Here's Thermos Urple putting his arrow right into the face of this lion that's coming toward him. It's not so hieratic scale. The power is shown more by his action and his depiction of his kingliness. This is a reconstruction drawing of Sargon II's palace to give you an idea of what these palace complexes would have been like. And of course, we have foundations. You can see the ziggurat way up in the top. You can see the avenue coming in, the main gates. So there would have been pairs of Lamaze figures at each entrance. So this is the inner Lamaze figures guarding the inner gate. I'm sorry it's such a blurry picture, but it gives you an idea of the scale. You can just barely make out the features on this one figure. And I always wonder when I see this statement that Sargon II said. He says he's been conferred on him the royalty of the nations, that the memory of his fortunate name will be propagated to the ends of the earth. Do you suppose he has accomplished and will accomplish this goal? Think about it. Here we are talking about him in an art history class. Assurbanipal is the next generation from Thermos Urple. And it's always interesting as we see the next generations unfold. We think about how short his empire was. 600 years is short in art historical terms, and we've been talking about this funny view of time that we have. So 600 years, that's what, twice as long as the United States has been around now. But a generation or so later, we've moved from an image of the king hunting lions, asserting his kingliness, to him in the garden from the palace at Nineveh. So now Assurbanipal is enjoying the fruits of the labors from Thermos Urple and the rulers that went before him. It's more peaceful. So you look at Thermos Urple compared to that, two very different depictions. So their empire ends. Now the Medes and the Scythians, remember the Scythians are way up from the Ukraine now, they're invading Assyrians, and they, Neo-Babylonians, overthrow them in 612, which this really is the end of Assyria. And we have Nebuchadnezzar II. And you can find him in the Old Testament. He rules from 604 to 562 BCE, so he rules for around 40 some odd years. So there was a civil war with Babylon, which was a very difficult period of intense fighting. It was so bad, for example, that this one city sold all their children into slavery to keep them from starving. Can you imagine that? I understand that this is a lot of complex history and a lot of kings coming and going, but I like to put them all in because, again, it sort of gives you this bird's eye view of how fast things can change. So this is Babylon in the 6th century BCE. And here's the ziggurat in the background. Some people say that the famous hanging gardens of Babylon would have been ziggurats. Others say it's the famed Tower of Babel, as it says in this slide. And this gate is actually in Berlin right now. That's a whole other question. How do you guys feel about this? Do you think it's good for this artwork to be taken away from its original site and preserved in museums far away? If you think about the fact of how much imagery and artwork's been destroyed in Middle Eastern wars, that would be an argument for that, I suppose. There's an interesting article in your book about this subject. Whatever you think, this particular image is in Berlin, so if you go to Berlin, you could see it. It's all glazed bricks. So they planned this pattern out ahead of time, and then they used all these different colors in the glazes on the bricks and then put it all together to create these images on the front of the gate. So in the 6th century BCE, Babylon is incorporated into the Persian Empire. The Achaemenid rulers made Persia the first great empire, so Persia is going to be where this lecture ends. And here's a list of the Achaemenid rulers and the books of the Old Testament, where they play a prominent role. So if you like to read the Old Testament, or if you're, interested in that history, it's very, very fun to integrate that with the art historical images that you're going to see and think about, where they fall in that timeline. When you read about Nebuchadnezzar, you can imagine this kind of civilization. So this one gate, this Ishtar gate, is representative of what these famed cities would look like. Again, this is a drawing. This is the real thing. There's 8,000 of these pottery vessels that were found in Elam. And I put this here just because this particular vase sort of falls within this time period. But if you think about the fact that there were 8,000 vessels, it's clear that this was a center for pottery and very, very important economic trade place. Now, Anatolia was way up in Turkey. This is the Lion Gate from 1400 in Anatolia. So a little bit earlier, these are the Hittites. The Hittites are the first people to work in iron. They're known for their metal work. And so there would have been some communication between the Hittites. Persian Empire is Indo-European speaking people from Parsa, which is southeast of Susa. They trace their ancestry back to Achaemenids, so that's why they're called Achaemenids. And so these are our Persian rulers. And they had a very different religion. They had a monotheistic religion. It was called Zoroastrianism. They had just one god who rewarded or condemned human beings after death. This is the first time we've seen this concept. So it's very interesting that that comes with the Persian Empire as well. And this god is always struggling with the spirit of evil and darkness. And Ahura Mazda is never shown in human form in Persian art. Sometimes he's depicted as a winged disc, which I can only think of the snitch, but at any rate, that's how he's shown. And so it was the foundation of the Achaemenid Persians. So their architecture is palaces rather than religious buildings because they had all their religious rituals outdoors. They would burn fires on altars. They didn't have images of their gods, or if they did, it was that winged disc. So the architecture goes to palaces. So this ceremonial complex at Persepolis is a palace, and you can go there today and see it. This is a modern day photo you can notice in the background. It's made all of limestone, so depending on what time of the year you go and see this, it's different color. This, viewed from above, gives you a bird's eye view of the floor plan of Persepolis. So, for example, all of these little black circles are columns. We're going to start seeing a lot more of these plans. I like to say, imagine just taking the roof off a building and then put yourself up in like a dirigible or something, or a balloon, and you're looking down. So every solid area that's black would be a solid wall or a column. So all the open spaces are doorways. On this one, I labeled the different parts of the plan. Here's a detail of the kind of artwork. So think about that plan that we just looked at and all the walls in it, and all of those walls have reliefs like this. We're just looking at one. We're looking at the audience hall because that had a very important relief in it. And the subject matter of it is all of the subjects and all of the nations that are coming and paying tribute. So if you know what kind of clothes and headdresses and what kinds of gifts they're bringing, you can tell what nation they're from. This particular one is Darius and Xerxes receiving tribute. And Xerxes is going to come up again in Greek art. We'll see him again. So here, it's very calm. Now, whether the victory was calm in the first place, we don't know, but this is shown calm, joyous, stately giving, and they're along the entrance to the audience hall. So when you come and visit the king, these reliefs give you an idea of what you're supposed to be doing. They would have been all painted and covered with gold leaf, so beautifully done. It wouldn't look like this. Darius I is seated. Xerxes is standing behind him, so we can see that Darius I is the most important in this particular relief. And we can see they are burning incense, they're burning frankincense and myrrh. And these are the gifts, for example, that the Eastern kings brought to Christ when he was born later. This shows the importance of these kinds of things in this culture. There were 100 of these 40-foot columns. And as you'll see later, and we'll see Persepolis again just to reinforce this idea, there's influence in both the reliefs and the architecture from both Egypt and from Greece. But the capitals of the column, which are the tops of the columns, are unique to Persia. They have bulls' heads on them. And this is the only place we see that. So it holds several thousand people. Here's an image of one of the bull capitals. So they're meant to carry the wooden ceiling beams, and they made a saddle out of the bull's forepart. So there would be two next to each other carrying these ceiling beams. But most of these capitals have been destroyed. So it's broken. Here's an image of coin money. Now, we know that money has been created as early as Ur, but it becomes more and more important. All of these cultures have coined money, and they have images of the rulers on them, and it is a good way for us to get an idea who they all are. So this is a daric. It's minted under Darius I from the 4th century BCE. So the Greeks are already in the 4th century BCE beginning to rise. So we have beautiful metalwork, and we're going to see this again with the Mycenaeans. So we start seeing a pattern or an evidence of congress. There's 144 feet of gold thread in this, all sort of wound up and then hammered together. So the Persian dominance comes to an end in 331. Alexander the Great is going to conquer the Achaemenids, and it ends and is assimilated. So we're going to begin to see links with Greece and with Egypt. And as I said at the beginning of this lecture, we are coming to the first thread in this tapestry that winds together into a knot, and then will begin unfolding again from the Greeks. So here's the conclusion. Mesopotamia is a diverse area, lots of power exchanges, technological advancements, luxury goods, creation of laws. So it's a really good example of the process of the construction of a civilization. And in chapter 3, we'll look at the Egyptians, which is sort of another view of the same thing, because again, we'll trace the Egyptians from Neolithic Egypt all the way up to the time of the Persians again. And thank you for listening.